Hi, it's Annette. I'm here to film my July and August wrap-up. I can't believe it's September already, but here we are. So basically the first book I read in July was The Rat and the Dawn by Renee Adair, but because I already discussed this book on my June wrap-up, I'm not gonna go further into this, but 5 stars from me for this book. The next book I read in July was The Fill-In Boyfriend by Casey West, and I gave this 2.5 stars. I thought it was cute and it was fluffy, but it's not really anything I haven't read before. Like, I don't know, they're kind of predictable, these sort of books, in my opinion, but I still like reading them every now and then. This story is about this girl Gia, who gets dumped at the parking lot of her school just before prom. So she basically decides to ask this random guy to be her fill-in boyfriend for the prom. And things start happening, obviously, because the fill-in boyfriend sees her friends as well, and it doesn't go as planned, basically. But yeah, 2.5 stars. In July there was also a Cramathon, which was hosted by Witty Novels, and I did actually really well. The Cramathon ran from July 10th to July 13th, and I managed to read 6 books. The challenges I completed was to read a graphic novel, to read 5 books in total, read 2 books in 24 hours, 1 book in hardback, and also there was a challenge to read a book in verse. I read 1 poetry book, so I guess that counts, sort of. All the books I read for the Cramathon were quite thin and short, which I suppose was the idea behind the Cramathon anyways, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, the first book I read was The Tinderbox by Hans Christian Andersen. This is one of the little black classics by Penguin I bought from London this summer. I gave this 3 stars. My favourite stories were Little Klaus and Big Klaus, and That Steadfast Tin Soldier, which I think was quite sad. And my least favourite was Red Shoes, which I gave 1 star. And yeah, just different fairy tales. Usually they say there's supposed to be some sort of lesson in fairy tales, I think, and I just couldn't see the point in some of the stories, but I suppose they were okay. Next up I read another little black classic by Penguin, and that was The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen. This one I gave 2 stars, which I suppose is quite harsh rating, because these stories Austen wrote when she was really young, and they were written purely for the entertainment of her family, and they were never meant to be published. So it's not the Austen that people read nowadays, basically. But yeah, I felt like the most of these stories, for me at least, were really hard to read because of the writing style was pretty old English. I don't know, I just didn't like most of the story. My favourite story, I think, or letter, was from a young lady very much in love to her friend. It's written in a different way. I don't know if that's on purpose or if it's a spelling mistake that she did when she was younger. But yeah, that one I gave 3 stars, and that was the highest rating I gave any of these stories, so not my favourite, but I'm hoping I will like the books that we actually read from Austen mostly, more than the short stories that she wrote when she was a teenager. Next up I read Sex Criminals Volume 2, Two Worlds, One Cup. This one I gave 4 stars. I really enjoy this story. It's about this couple who discovers that the time stops when they orgasm, and they decide to use that time to rob a bank to save their local library. The art style is quite colourful, but not my favourite. The story in the second volume was better developed than in the first volume, and I wasn't as confused as I was reading the first volume. Also, the sex tips at the end of the graphic novel were absolutely hilarious, kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of things. For example, denying your partner satisfaction can be a real turn-on for both of you. Blindfold your partner, tease them with light touches, and then move to a new city. So I really enjoyed this overall. 4 stars. The next graphic novel I read was volume 2 in the Deadly Class series. This is Kids of the Black Hole. And 5 stars for me for this one. I really like this. The art style is very gritty. And this is very violent as well. But again, as with the Sex Criminals volume 2, this was far more better developed than the first volume, and I felt like I understood where the story was going better than while reading the first volume, and some things were better explained, and I just liked the story in general, so 5 stars. Next up is the hardback, again a short book. I read Very Good Lives, The Fringe Benefits of Failure and the Importance of Imagination by J.K. Rowling. 5 stars, very inspiring, very motivational. I just wish that J.K. Rowling could have given me the graduation speech as well. This was fantastic, and this, the book is very nicely illustrated as well. And yeah, it says, having the courage to fail, she said, is vital to a good life as any conventional measure of success. Imagining ourselves into the place of another, particularly someone less fortunate than ourselves, is a uniquely human quality to be nurtured at all costs. And yeah, I love this. Next read was another Penguin Black Classic book. This is why I managed to read so much in July, because these are really short. And this one is the poetry book from Emily Bronte, The Night is Darkening Round Me, and I really enjoyed these poems, but again, some of them were really hard to understand, and it's just because English is not my mother tongue, I suppose, but I feel like some of the old English, I haven't learned that, and it's quite hard to understand. So, but yeah, very beautiful poems nevertheless. And I gave this 3 stars. Then I read The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, and this one has 2 gothic kind of ghost stories. The first one is The Old Nurse's Story, and then the second one is Curious If True. And The Old Nurse's Story I loved. I gave it 5 stars. It was exactly what I expect a gothic Victorian ghost story to be like. Very creepy and very gothic and Victorian, but really enjoyable. The second story I didn't like that much. I gave it 3 stars. It was a bit confusing and I was struggling through it, and the ending as well, if it actually was what I suspected it was, I feel like was a cop-out. But overall I gave this 4 stars. And the last little black classic I read in July was The Brothers Grimm, The Robber Bridegroom, which I gave 3 stars. My favourite story was the story of Lazy Harry, because I could relate to that and I just thought it was funny. Also, I really liked The Devil's 3 Golden Hairs, which I gave 4 stars. I thought it was probably the most clever story of all these 7 stories. And I also like Snow White because it's, I don't know, it's just one of those childhood stories, you know, that stay with you. But it was a bit different in this one. First of all, I do hope that Snow White had been in the glass casket coffin for a while, because when the story starts, Snow White is basically 7 years old. And I just don't want her to be 7 years old when the prince finds him and marries her, even if that was, you know, the even if the age to be married was a lot less than it is nowadays. But complaints about Snow White, she was so gullible, like, oh my god, no wonder that she took the apple. She was like, she was especially told by the dwarves to not let anyone in, not accept anything from anyone she doesn't know, and then she's like, oh, that's a nice apple, maybe I should take a bite. Oh, poor Snow White. My complaint about Brothers Grimm stories, I've heard this before, but the way they portray women as evil or really wicked or like stupid possessions, apparently that didn't happen before Brothers Grimm kind of changed the stories, but I just didn't like that. Why do you have to make women so bad, you know? So yeah, 3 stories. Again, some of the stories I felt like they didn't teach you anything, they were just stories, and I've learned that fairy tales are basically supposed to teach you something, a lesson or something. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but yeah, 3 stars. It was interesting to read these, but some of the stories I was just rolling my eyes like, why? Then I read the first volume in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman called Preludes and Knock. And this is probably the darkest graphic novel I've ever read. Like, look at that graphic, look at that art style, like it's really, really dark. And this story basically starts when these people try to summon death, I think, and instead somehow they end up summoning the Sandman, and then the Sandman stays kind of locked up for several years and loses all these possessions of his. When the Sandman gets freed several decades later, he starts to track the possessions down, and the story goes from there. But yeah, I gave this 3 stars. While I really liked this story, there were loads of DC world references, like the DC comic world references, which was done on purpose, I hear, because they wanted to people kind of start reading this series. And while the story progresses, there's not gonna be that many references to the other DC comics anymore. But if you're not familiar with that, then you might kind of miss out on the references a bit. So yeah, I like the story, but you kind of need to know something about the other DC world comics as well in order to know all the references in this graphic novel. So hence 3 stars. Next up I read Black Iris by Leah Ryder. Absolutely love this one. 5 stars from me. I'm not exactly sure what to tell you about this book so as not to spoil the whole plot, but it deals with bullying and mental illnesses and revenge and LGBT themes. The main 2 girls in this story are bisexual, I think. The timeline kind of keeps jumping back and forth in the story, so it takes a while to get into this story. But once you do, holy crap. Like, I was totally blindsided by what happened. And the writing is absolutely stunning. But this is a new adult book, so be aware that there is a lot of graphic sex scenes and graphic violence as well, and substance abuse. But if you can stomach those things, then I highly recommend that you give this a go. So those were all the books I read in July. I think 11 in total, unless you count The Wrath and the Dawn, in which case I read 12 books. Really good. And moving on to the August wrap-up. The first book I read in August was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. I actually haven't hauled this book yet. It's coming, but I have to edit the second part of the haul first. But yeah, Brianna from Gusher Books recommended this for me when I said that I wasn't too impressed by Maybe Someday by Colin Hoover. I think the Ugly Love and Maybe Someday kind of divide people, so if you like Ugly Love, then maybe you don't like Maybe Someday that much, and if you loved Maybe Someday, then you probably won't enjoy Ugly Love that much. But I really love this. I think 4.5 stars from me for this one. And this story basically starts when this girl, Tate, moves in with her pilot brother and ends up bumping into the brother's colleague / neighbor when he's really drunk and taking care of him while he's drunk. And they don't really like each other at first, but then some attraction develops and they decide to start this no strings attached relationship with each other. There's kind of like two timelines. The first timeline follows Tate and this guy Miles and their the no strings attached relationship. And the other timeline follows Miles 6 years earlier. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was really good. My only complaint is that the 6 years earlier flashbacks, I couldn't see Miles in the character. Like, the Miles 6 years earlier was like a totally different person to the Miles now. Which, I don't know, I suppose it was how it was supposed to be, but it kind of felt like two different stories for me. But still, I really like this. And again, this is new adult, so you know, the sexy scenes are going all the way. After that, I read another new adult book from my phone. I'm not sure if you can see it. I read Return, this one, by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I gave it 2 and 5 stars. I didn't read the synopsis before I bought it, and I didn't realize that it was a spin-off series to the Covenant series, which I haven't read. So whenever they kind of made references to what had happened before, I was like, what is this? Where do I get this? And I think I was like midway through the book before I kind of realized what was going on. And that is why I didn't really enjoy it. The story is a bit confusing as well. There were all sorts of like Greek mythology creatures. There were titans, there were Apollons, there were half-gods, and the story revolves around that. There's this guy who's Apollyon, and then he's kind of charged with the task of protecting this girl. Feelings develop, as you can probably guess. But yeah, the humor wasn't for me, which is sad because usually I end up loving Jennifer's books, but this one I was a bit disappointed with. The next book I read on my phone as well, and that was Every Last Breath by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Again, this book I had been waiting for since the start of the year. It was the conclusion to the Dark Elements series, I think, and I loved it. 5 stars. That was the Jennifer L. Armentrout writing I was hoping to get with the Titan. And not going into too much detail with the third book, if you in case you haven't read the first 2 books and you still want to do that, but the story tells about demons and gargoyles, and then there's this girl who's basically half demon and half gargoyle, and she has the ability to suck a soul through a kiss. And I loved the third book. It was so good. It was quite interesting actually. I think the Jennifer actually made this poll asking people how they wanted the love triangle to end. So it was up to the readers to decide who the main character ends up with. And yeah, I loved it. The next book I read in August was Nimona by Noel Stevenson. This is an actual graphic novel, it's really thick. And this one started as a webcomic and was turned into a book. This tells about this shapeshifter girl called Nimona who wants to work for the villain who is Ballister, Lord Ballister. I really like this. The humor was really funny. The whole sort of nemesis slash friendship thing between Lord Ballister, this one, and Sir Goldenloin, kind of reminded me of my favourite ship ever, Harry and Draco. Especially at the end with the Christmas morning comics with Ballister and Goldenloin. I don't know, I read way too much fanfiction, let's be honest. But that's what I thought. It was Harry and Draco for me. The only reason why I didn't give this 5 stars basically is that the text in the comic was tiny at times, like really hard to read. And, well, not hard to read, just annoying to read because it was so tiny. And the ending I felt was a bit lazy. I didn't like it, so 4 stars nevertheless, really good. And the last book I read in August was Blood Fever by Karen Mary Moaning. There's a bit of a glare, can't help it, it's the window. But Blood Fever is the second book in the Fever series by Karen Mary Moaning, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I still really enjoyed the story, and I think the second book made one of the main characters, Barons, a bit more likable than in the first book. Even though I think I still kind of prefer Blaine. There were some new characters introduced, which I'm sure I'm gonna love. They were already like really funny and snarky in a way. And yeah, I really liked it. And basically, if you're not familiar with the series starts with this main character, Michaela, learning that her sister has been murdered in Dublin. And she decides to kind of go and find out what happened. And ends up finding this whole new world filled with fairies and all sorts of other creatures. And yeah, it's adult urban fantasy, so it's kind of frustrating how long it takes for the relationships to develop, because I'm more used to the adult romance genre, but I'm still really enjoying the story, and I have the 5-book bundle on my iPad, so I'm definitely continuing with the series soon. So that was my July and August wrap up, and I'm pretty pleased with myself. Yes, I read a whole bunch of books. Can we lift them? And my phone. Here's my wrap up. Have you read any of the books I mentioned in my wrap up, and what did you think of them? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!